Okay, we are going to come back in session for the licensing committee meeting in Sacramento, California, and we're going to continue on with our pathways to licensure. And we have just finished Section 2915.5, making some recommendations across the board. The staff's going to bring back our recommendations to us. And now we are looking at, starting at 2940. And I think there's no more yellow highlighted, but is there anything that we noticed from 2940 through to the end of this, the laws? Okay. Dr. Phillips? Okay. Through 2948. So I do have just a question. 2947, it says appointment of commissioners on examination, qualifications, parentheses, repealed, because we don't have commissioners anymore and we've scratched out other things. So why is it still there? Does it need to be there? Is it part of our history or what?
It's just part of the history, just noting that that section was repealed in our sunset provisions in our sunset extension bill.
Okay. So we leave it in there for a while? Is that what we do or what?
Hello, it's on, thanks. Because this section was previously in our pathways review, so we just want to make the note that it's already been taken out, so then in the future, then we know what happened to it. So we don't have to look at it anymore because it was completed already.
Okay. I don't.
We can take it out.
Yeah, we can take it out for the next
question.
time, yes.
Yeah, I understand how it happened, I just want, yeah, so let's take it out. If it's repealed, it's already in something else, so, okay. Now we are ready for, oh, that's right.
I move to adopt the pathways to licensure statute changes with all of the discussion earlier about the data to be added, research, et cetera, to move it to the next level.
Second.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we accept the work we just did on the statutes of pathways to licensure. And is there any more board discussion about, committee discussion about this? And seeing no public questions or comments,
Can we just refer to the 5A?
Actually what they are.
The sections
Section
5A
5A.
on the agenda, so
okay.
the motion is clear.
I want to amend the motion to adopt the proposed amendments to the BMP code 5A on the agenda with all of the additions and kind of revisions that were discussed.
Second.
Okay, so we've basically amended the motion. It's been seconded. I think we can call for a roll call vote now. I already did. No public comments. So. Okay.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Passes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Glass-Steagall. Now we are ready for agenda item 5B. These will be the regulations affecting pathways to licensure. And let's start off with section, hold on. Okay, we'll start with just the first page. There aren't any yellow highlighted areas, but are there anything on 1380.3 through 1381.4 that anybody would like to comment on? Okay, seeing nothing and nothing from the public, let's move on to 1381.5. 1382.
I had a few comments on that, and obviously, we've already discussed the idea of making these things consistent, so I won't belabor that point. I take it that putting the date in here as to when things need to be completed after January 1st of 1970, we keep that in here because of people that are applying for license from out of state?
That was part of the initial legislation that was enacted in the mid to late 70s.
Do we need to keep it in regulation?
I'll defer to Ms. Marks on that.
I mean,
The statute's the statute. I mean, we can't regulate around what the statute says, but
right.
I
Well,
think,
it seems to me that in terms of how we're now taking a look at, if you can prove that you've had it, blah, 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 and these are the ways. I think anybody prior to 1970, if they can show that they had it, kind of more power to you, I don't know. I mean, that was a long time ago.
a long time ago.
And I think at the time that it was enacted that, since that would have been within, I believe the requirement came effective in like 78 or 77 or 78. So there could have been people that had courses prior to that date. So maybe they just, the intent was just to make sure that it was a more relevant current course. I doubt that we would see any that was completed prior to January 1st, 1970 now, so. And I just looked back at the statute, and it doesn't actually have that language in there. I think that was just kind of not made up, but decided upon by the relevant boards at the time, because the requirements for the training had to be consistent between the affected boards. So I think that was just part of the language that was promulgated at that time.
So you recommend you take it out?
Yeah, I recommend we take it
Yeah, I
out.
agree. And we want to talk, the be obtained part, we've already talked about that part. We've already talked about 6 hours contact. Do we want to include what the content would have there?
It's pretty broad.
It's pretty broad.
So I don't think it's hampering anybody in terms of what they want to teach.
Okay.
But I think it is good for them to talk about sexual identity, sexual behavior, and sexual disorders.
Okay.
My question is the second sentence, which says it's the intent of the board, blah, 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 blah. I don't know that we need that in our regulation.
Where's?
The second sentence of D, it is the intent of the board that all persons have minimum training in human sexuality.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think that's really necessary.
Other neither.
So maybe we can strike, I would recommend we strike that.
And should we keep the sentence after that in there? It's not intended that by complying with the requirements of this section only, a practitioner is fully trained. I don't either. People know they're not
No.
fully trained. This is exposure again.
People do have doctorates after all.
Hopefully
Hopefully they
they
don't.
get that. Okay, and basically, I think we'll do the next one, but whatever we're deciding here on human sexuality training, we want to see essentially replicated for every other one that we're talking about.
With meeting the requirement by either coursework, CE courses, or applied experience.
Correct. And 6 hours, And then that D part, I mean, if we just take a look at the next one over, I mean, a lot of this we would want to take out because we don't need an official transcript, we don't, all this kind of stuff. And for D part, do we want to include it in a paragraph kind of thing? Because this is talking about a course, that has to be obtained in a educational institution and all like that. So do we, what do we want to do here for all these parts on, I'm just looking at the next part now, I'm looking at the alcoholism and chemical.
Yeah, that one does dictate quite a bit of the
It does,
curriculum.
yeah. I mean, so do we want to just kind of give a more broad kind of thing,
Yeah, because the difference here is that it's actually a course.
Right.
Not a 10-hour.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, and here are all the parts of the course that need to be there. We could put it in paragraph form, I mean.
Well, even before that, just starting the very beginning, in terms of even how, like on page 2, like
Oh.
beginning at 16.
On 1382?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
should that be the same, kind of moving over and just thinking about consistency here?
Right, we don't want to say completed coursework, or we can say coursework or training, yeah.
I'm trying to read this again.
And we want to say if you haven't had it pre-licensure, then it's a one-time
Okay,
only,
for all of these, right?
for all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we want that first paragraph to, introducing it to all of them be similar, and we want to say how it can be obtained, we want to say what the number of contact hours is, and then we want to have a part D, which is, and it includes these topics. Do you want to do it in a paragraph form, like
Or you can
under
break it out as
1382, or do you
sub-items.
want to break it out like they did here in 1382.3? What do you think?
I think a paragraph is sufficient to
I
this.
do
I
too.
kind of actually have problems with the next one.
I do too, yeah, exactly.
That's too much dictation.
It's too much detail, okay. So we have human sexuality training, 1382. Is there any public comment about 1382? Seeing none. 1382.3. Now, again, we want it to start the same way. This is, of course, pre-licensure. If you don't have a pre-licensure, it's a one-time only thing, right? Most people have had this who are practicing now. Well, everybody's had it who's practicing now, because that's how it's been. So this is kind of going forward. We take out all the stuff about it has to be a course in this, and it lasts a semester or a quarter, and it has to be in an educational institution. So that second part is be obtained. It's going to say our ways of obtaining it, right? And then we're going to say 6 contact hours, and then we're going to say a training it includes the study of or training of, and then we want to say, which of these do we want to take out and include in a paragraph? Do you want to put them all in a paragraph?
The only thing that comes to me is, and maybe that's some of the thinking at the time, to cover all these items. Of course, it's a little bit hard to imagine covering
Right.
these. So it almost was like, I don't know if, including these, kind of how we wrote the other ones written? No, it includes, it's very specific. I would almost feel like, I don't know how you would,
It says physiological, psychological, and social cultural variables. So, I mean, we could use that broader language, because you're right, this was for a course, and it's like, here, this is your core syllabus right here. And really, that's not what we want to do. So, we want to say,
Something like assessment and intervention of chemical dependency, or
yeah,
alcoholism and chemical
including,
dependency.
current theories of physiological
Or sociocultural
psychological
film, yeah.
aspects, sociocultural aspects, yeah. Populations at risk. I mean, that, but that would be social cultural.
Yeah, I think we should keep it relatively short
Yeah.
and pithy.
And then just to clarify, because this one specifically says that it shall not be less than a semester or quarter,
We're taking it out.
and you're saying we're changing from that to 6 hours. I just want to, okay.
We're changing everything.
Yeah, the statute doesn't require 15.
So do we have enough of the general kind of thing? Maybe, did you catch that language?
Yeah, I put a mobile note at the top of the last.
Rip page.
Yeah, but the paragraph form, we're going to just boil it down to a handful of those factors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll strike whichever ones you want.
Did you get the language that they talked about?
Yeah, we just talked about, let's see,
Assessment and intervention.
Assessment and intervention of chemical dependency and alcoholism.
yeah, the study of physiological, psychological, and social cultural variables associated with alcoholism and chemical dependency, at risk.
He's got to catch on.
Okay, assessment and intervention, the study of physiological.
Psychological and
It's-
sociocultural variables. Is that right?
Yeah. Associated with alcoholism/chemical dependency. We want prevailing treatments or something like that, right? Because we've just said assessment, but we want
Prevailing treatment models.
treatment models, and do we want to say at-risk
Well, I think
population?
it's
I think that's
sociocultural, isn't
sociocultural, yeah. So major treatment approaches, yeah, to alcoholism and chemical dependency. That's it.
That's it.
The only other thing is this on number 17, the ethical and legal issues for clinical practice might be a good one.
Yeah, I think that's good to throw in
Yeah.
there. I think it gives people enough latitude that they can do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's in paragraph 1.
And that can be usually covered in 6 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you want 1 through 18 struck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they added ethical and legal issues to that
Yeah.
paragraph.
Yeah.
And ethical, legal issues.
Okay.
I wouldn't say clinical practice, I would just say practice.
Yeah.
For practice.
Well, I think this is good for that to be in any course.
Yeah. I agree.
Even though people hate it.
But you know, it's so weird.
Actually, in In human sexuality, it's a dash. Antoinette? If you look at human sexuality, D, physiological, psychological is a dash.
Oh, it's a dash.
Yeah,
In between the words instead of a comma.
right.
Putting physiological, comma,
Okay.
psychological,
Comma.
and social cultural or socio-cultural,
I
whatever
think
it
it's one
is.
word, actually. Sociocultural.
Socio-cultural, one word.
Is a dash.
And did you want that same language for human sexuality in D then?
Well, we have to, no, well, human sexuality is different from chemical dependency.
Okay.
So hold on.
Okay.
So, no, we want, oh, yeah, right, yeah, we want
For-
that. Thank you. We already did. Include the study of physiological, comma, psychological, and socio-cultural instead of social hyphen cultural,
So that's to be copied into human sexuality.
in
Just
human sexuality as well.
Not,
Legal issues.
Yeah, we can add that.
It
Always
should be in
want,
everything.
Perfect.
always want to have ethical and legal issues. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. I was,
no problem.
yeah.
So it's D.
in
It's under D.
The first sentence is D.
And the opinion we have here that we don't have areas about that.
What's that? Well, you were replacing that physiological hyphen, psychological, all that with the language that you,
And we're changing, you're back at human sexuality training now?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, we're not going to have these 4B obtained things that aren't going to look like that. That
Right.
all is gone.
You want a new paragraph?
This one.
Yeah, and it's not going to,
How the requirements going to be met.
Yes.
yeah.
Fourth
Yes.
word,
Which is in my global note.
yeah.
This may or may not be paragraph one on how it will be done, but basically we want it to look like that.
and you added alcoholism,
Okay,
chemical
so then we
dependency
have-
language back into human
All
sexuality,
applicants
which we
shall
don't want
provide
that.
the board. That should be in a separate.
In that part that
section.
you copied.
And we have that in our CPD stuff that we're doing, what proof.
So where it says associated
Well, that could be one of those
sexual
consistency
identity.
things,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, right. Right.
And, but you want to put associated with
Human
Sex-
sexuality.
sexual identity, sexual behavior, and sexual disorders, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, got it.
Oh, that makes sense.
Can I ask a question that hopefully will help when I review the ISR? I'm not sure I understand what ethical and legal issues for practice refers to, what that means.
It says in current language.
It is in current language, but,
Consider that, you know, ethics, legal issues as you work.
That might be covered already.
Confidentiality kinds of things, I mean, there are a lot of, I guess, I mean, we're always going to include that.
I mean, I guess unless you're wanting it covered in the curriculum.
Well, yeah, I think we do. Because the question of any kind of cross-cultural or cross-identity factor is going to require us to be competent to deal with the other person and also to be able to identify in ourselves anything that's going to impact that interaction. So it's not going to be the leitmotif of the entire class, but it should be covered, I think.
Special considerations might be what it might be or how it.
Yeah, right.
These are the things to think of, you know, what if you're going to do, you know, when you do this in an ethical way.
Because these issues are really about kind of sociocultural competency. It's a form of competency. We have an ethical obligation to do that, and that should be discussed as an ethical obligation, I think.
Okay,
One of our-
I'm sorry, yeah, you want to come up here so we can actually get you on tape?
Dr. Joe Linder Crow, the California Psychological Association. Just to this point, I was wondering about the same question, and that is that just stating ethical and legal, whatever it said, seems very general. It sort of popped out at me. Do you mean ethical and legal issues related to practice in this area? It might be helpful to say, because you already have a requirement for ethical and legal issues. So if you mean specific to this
Specific to this area.
area or
Yeah.
population or whatever, that might be helpful. And then just a note of information for the board, and I don't know whether you want to tackle this or not, but I was recently told or corrected that the correct term is alcohol and substance use disorder rather than substance abuse. And so if you have references to that, that's just for your consideration. I was having a conversation with several people who are specialists in that area. And I noticed that yesterday, also in our conversations with staffers at the Capitol, that's the term of art right now, just FYI.
Substance use, yeah.
Alcohol and substance use disorder,
Disorder, that's the diagnosis.
not substance abuse.
That's right.
Right,
That's the
not-
yeah,
right, right.
What's it called, what it's called diagnostically. Thank you. I don't think we have it in our thing, but, yeah.
It's in current, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Linder Crow, and I do like that ethics in this area, basically,
And
for each other.
question to make a universal change to address the concern that was brought up by Dr. Linder Crow. If we put ethical and legal issues for clinical practice to meet the requirements of this section and use that in each of the sections, does that make sense?
Take out clinical practice, take out clinical.
Jason, specifically ethical and legal issues related to practice in this area.
That's it. That's all we want to say.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks. That's a better way of saying it, and that's what we want to put in the end of all of these. Now, that brought us back, now that we went back to look at it, it brought us back to the next sentence under 1382. All applicants shall provide the board with documentation of completion of the required training. That shouldn't be in that same section. We should have it be E, say, but, and do we need, as determined by the board, what does that? And we'll have that in our CPD stuff. Okay? So we want to add that part to everyone as well,
Move this out to E. right
to
here.
E, that last sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you want specific language about the acceptability of the documentation?
What we could
Well,
do
as
is
determined-
we could mirror it from the suicide risk assessment language and have it be how we satisfy the requirement, and that was approved by the board, to submit the board a written certification from the registrar or the director of training of the educational institution or the program from which the applicant graduated, stating the coursework as required by this section is included in the curriculum required for graduation at the time or within the coursework that was completed by the applicant.
Well, they can also bring, because these will be some people for maybe.
Or the primary supervisor where they got their experience.
And if somebody's coming maybe from another state, it could be the CE, it could just be the one-time CE certificate, so.
Yep.
It's like as did, and did we have that there, the one-time CE certificate? Okay. Okay?
And we also included CPD as a way of achieving that. So
Great.
it's a traditional coursework or continued professional development.
Or five.
So that could mean it could be in a peer consultation group where you talk about all that stuff. Okay. All right?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to move on from human sexuality training, 1382, go back to training in alcoholism and chemical dependency, detection and treatment, 1382.3. Just make sure we have all the parts to that.
Do we want to use a different name?
Huh?
Do we want a different header?
I don't know. Is that what y'all do? Put the headers there?
In statute, the headers are given to us by legislative council. With regulation, we are able to give the titles for each of the sections. And because this looks like it's limited to training, even though it talks about a semester or quarter, that might want to be reconsidered, as we did with AB 89. And I think we recommended, I think, experience or training experience or.
Well, in statute, you don't have a header, so
Right.
it's just the section.
So this
Right.
is for us.
So this is for us, so it can be
Okay.
experience in, instead of
Okay.
coursework or training, it could just be experience in.
Well, that would be our human sexuality, it would be all of these, yeah. So whatever we want to say, it's just a way of identifying it for us. Training is fine. It doesn't necessarily mean coursework.
And on the ones, when you turn the page, they've had listed with training requirements.
So we can take out the requirements and just say training, yeah. Okay, so I think we're all right with 1382.
So my question was, given what Dr. Jovinder Crow said, do
Yeah.
we want to change the header for this 1382.3 to change it to substance use? Okay, just
I
wanted
don't
to ask
think
the
so, because
question.
that's a specific diagnosis, and I
Yeah,
think.
it's a specific
this is-
diagnostic category. I think
Yeah.
there's a more general
Right, we're talking.
umbrella
about
that can go above that.
It was just a couple of places you have the term sexual abuse, substance abuse.
Right,
You might want to look at that,
right.
but not.
But that's what we are talking about here, not the diagnosis of substance use
That line was
disorder.
deleted.
Yeah,
That's one of the 18 things we
Okay.
deleted.
so we did delete it. Yeah. Okay, as long, and just the last E part to that one too needs to be, here are the ways that you show us that you've had this. Jason, okay? So that will mimic it too. So I think we're okay for 1382.3.
Actually, that's going to be below your paragraph there.
What we can do is look at all of them in their entirety and mirror each of the constructions so that A is A and it's always this, and B is always this, and C is always this, and D is always this. We can do that.
Nope. No, that's what she was saying about copying that line that you made E from human sexuality.
Actually, this isn't reading like we want it to read, Jason, if you'll go back to 1382.3. Okay, you're going to take out that whole first part,
This one?
the whole thing, because all of this has changed now. Wait a minute, wait.
Mhm.
Yeah. Take out,
Here, all the way, it's,
take out A,
yep,
take out B,
yep,
take out C.
all right.
Okay. And we have an introductory piece that goes in there that will mimic the introductory piece for human sexuality training. So it's, okay. So that part doesn't. Then, yeah, it may not be D now, whatever number it is. We want to say, training shall include, and this is just how we started. So, training in this area shall include, or however we want to say it. And then we start with the study of physiological, psychological, and sociocultural variables associated with,
It's already the next sentence.
Yeah, it's already there.
right? Yeah. So, right, he put two parts, and I'm saying the two parts don't go there. We don't start with assessment and intervention. We start with, and we don't start with this course shall include. What we start with is whatever we've put at the top is our, such training shall, colon, A, be obtained in this way, B, have a minimum of, or have six contact hours, C, include the study of.
Yeah, we'll go do them all.
Okay,
here.
So are we-
all of
We'll do them
this.
all after, yeah.
Yeah.
So are we
but
talking-
I just want to make sure it's marked on here, because it's not. You don't
Yeah,
have
no,
it
that was
part
my
of your,
global change note from the very first
Okay.
section that says, review with desired comments and changes, replicate for all pre-licensed.
And we'll
coursework.
format them all the
Okay.
same.
It could be SBE, CE, or
Okay.
PPE, and then paragraph one is
Right.
all
the,
right,
and 6 hours.
okay.
I'm unclear. Do we want it in a paragraph format, or do you want them broken out as items?
We're doing it in paragraph.
We're doing it in paragraph.
Okay,
format. Yeah.
okay, because you started to do the A, B, C, I started,
No, well, I'm.
picture in my head,
ABC
picture in my head
paragraph.
broken.
Yeah, ABC
A is a paragraph, B is a paragraph, C.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
The main thing is we just want to make sure that whatever either the coursework, the course, or the training requirement includes whatever subject matter area you want covered.
Right. That's what we're
Other than that, we'll make the format all the same for all of the different categories.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yep, that's great. Okay, that's just all I wanted to do. Thank you. So now we're at child abuse assessment and training requirements.
You want to get rid of requirement?
Yeah, child abuse assessment training. And,
Do you want to change this to 6?
I'm sorry?
You want to change this to 6 hours?
Yeah. But it's not going to be here. It's not going to be in this first paragraph. So everything, it's 6 hours.
Right.
It can be obtained in these ways.
Right.
And now we do want to talk about what it should include. And what this should include is,
And this one, the content area is laid out in section 28 of the BMP code. So this is one of the general provisions
Okay.
that applies to us, Medical Board and Board of Behavioral Sciences.
medical board as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So do we want to take a look at that, or we just want to leave it as it is? Because we're still asking them to change the statute, right, and go along with us to change, right?
I'm sorry, I misspoke. That just counts for Board of Behavioral Sciences and the Board of Psychology.
Right, I didn't think there was ever anything.
And the content and length are determined by the agency, so.
I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry, wrong section.
I mean, this just says completed coursework or training in child abuse assessment and reporting.
You go on page 4 though. Page 4 in the orange book. There's some more information.
Under C3 on page 4 in the Orange Book, it says includes a study of the assessment method of reporting of sexual assault, neglect, severe neglect, general neglect, willful cruelty or unjustifiable punishment, corporal punishment or injury and abuse in out-of-home care. Training shall also include physical and behavioral indicators of abuse, crisis counseling techniques, community resources, rights and responsibilities of reporting, consequences of failure to report, caring for a child's needs after a report is made, sensitivity to previously abused children and adults, and implications and methods of treatment for children and adults.
And above in C, it mentions the knowledge of CANRA.
Yeah, questions about that? All right, I don't particularly like those, and clearly that's more than child abuse assessment, and, so what,
I wonder if they're saying child abuse assessment intervention.
I think that's what we ought to call it, because they sure are requiring
Yeah.
intervention.
Perhaps that's something you would like to cover in our regulatory language?
Yeah, this is our regulatory language we're looking at now, right?
No, the content of the coursework that was laid out in section 28 of the BMP code. I don't know if you want to clarify or make more specific in the regulations the area of child abuse assessment that you want covered, if you want it to be.
That's what I think we're trying to do right now, so it'll mimic the way we talk about it in regs mimics the way we've talked about the other stuff in regs. So I think we want to give very broad things, but realizing that this changes the way that the law is, or statute is written right now.
Yeah, it seems to me the only way they could change the regulation. I don't think we need to list all those categories. I think we can do what we did here and say, shall include training in each of the subject areas described in section 28. But I wonder if we shouldn't be looking at section 28.
That's what we're looking at right now. And this is what says.
Well, I understand that, but looking at amending section.
Absolutely.
It's a ridiculously.
It's ridiculous.
Complicated list of things.
Well, one thing that comes to my mind too, it seems like it should be child abuse assessment, training, and reporting, which is what is covered here, not just the training. So
Right.
I think
That's
the
a
header
good
needs
point.
to change.
Good point.
And reporting.
And reporting, it's
So the assessment,
assessment.
intervention, and reporting, reporting training?
No training.
So for sections that are spelled out more in a statute that is not listed on the agenda, perhaps after the two stakeholder, I would hate to, well,
Let's just leave it at, according to 28,
Not have a separate.
not have a separate thing, and then
Okay.
we'll, I mean, that's something else for us to do, but not right now. We do want to go to.
parking
other-
lot, section 28. Got
There
it.
you go.
There you go. Thank you. Okay. So what we're changing here is the ways it can be earned, the 6 hours, and not changing the content at this point in time.
Do we need to say completed or on or after whatever the date is?
No,
I think that can come out.
yeah,
I think you get the standard documentation one, right?
right. We
Yeah.
want our, yeah, and standard documentation.
The standard.
Yeah, yeah. Standard, we want our standard first paragraph, kind of saying, here's how this has to be taken, then we want, here's how it can be taken or gotten, then we want to say what's included, or in this case, follow 28, BMP Code 28, and then we want to say documentation.
And I, sorry to throw
I'll
a
email you, Dr. Martin.
quick monkey wrench, but the statute here that is a parking lot issue says a minimum of 7 contact hours.
Right.
Right.
And we want to change
So-
it to 6.
Right.
It says not less than 7.
But you'll have to change the statute before you change the regulation.
Okay, so we have to keep it 6 right now, but this is something we might take to. Yeah.
7.
I mean,
7,
7 right
yeah.
now, but
But,
thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
All righty. Whatever we're allowed to change. Let's change.
I've got a little parking lot started over here, so
Okay,
we'll.
thank you. Sorry, y'all, I just have to make sure we know. Okay. So that is child abuse assessment, intervention, and reporting? Is that what we talked about? Okay. Now we are at, continuing to see no public comment at this point in time. We are at 1382.5, spousal or partner abuse assessment, detection, and intervention strategies. Anything besides our usual here? Let's see, do we have,
2914's in our code.
I'm sorry?
2914's in our code, so we do have authority there. to
We
seek
do
changes.
have the authority?
We have authority to seek changes for our own code section.
Okay. Thank you.
And those, if I remember right, are very broad as well.
So, I mean, coursework includes assessment, detection, and intervention strategies. Total of 2 hours. Well, I mean, that's
Not less than. And, what is that, so 3?
not less than a combined total of 2 hours, yeah. So we've said 6.
But people that just start after January, so it's
Yeah.
15.
Oh, yeah, after January 2004, it's 15. So we're going to, back to 6.
Quick question, sorry to roll you back to the last section, but 1382.4 covers child abuse assessment, intervention, and reporting training. Section 28 of the BMP code is for child, elder, and dependent adult abuse assessment. And we don't have anywhere, we have aging and long-term care in our statute and regulations, but nothing that deals with adult or elder abuse assessment or reporting. So I didn't know if you wanted to consider amending that section to cover the 3 areas, or just leave as is with child abuse.
Well, then, yeah, why would we need the aging and long-term care? I mean, because if that's something separate, I mean, it can be included in that, I guess. I don't know.
So I have a question,
We
Ms.
have it,
Sorg.
yeah.
Ms. Sorg, I have a question though on 28. B, it only says required training in the area of child abuse assessment and reporting. Like the header says that, but there's no, I'm trying to read quickly, I don't see the elder and dependent adult.
And it says, I think
If you-
under A, about ensuring that the professionals of healing arts are able to have a demonstrable contact with those groups, and that they're training in the assessment and the reporting of all 3 categories. So even though B says the 2 boards shall establish training for just child abuse assessment,
But if you look at sub F, it says the Board of Psychology and the Board of Behavioral Sciences are encouraged to include coursework regarding assessment and reporting of elder and dependent adult abuse.
Then there's a separate section that talks about aging and long-term care.
Right.
29.
Does that include abuse?
So then that, you might want
We
to
have.
talk about including that when you get down to section. Thank you.
And not to
Well,
mention.
they're different things.
But not to mention, Mr. Thomas, because I think this is the other clarification, which I think that Ms. Mark's document shows, the difference between required and encouraged. So if I read what you just read, it doesn't seem as though that's a requirement. It's an
Right.
encouragement of that and pharmacology and quite a few other things. So I don't know if we'd have to, I don't know, I wouldn't think we want to change the header for that, personally. I feel like. Because I feel like, I think that's a different kind of, given all the other encouragements, if we're going to do it here, we might need to do it for all the other ones, or what would be our rationale?
I think that's fine. I mean, really, this is talking about dependent populations, or, populations who basically are more vulnerable. You're talking about children or elder adults or people who are maybe dependent for their, adults who might be dependent for their care on others.
No, and I agree, and like I said, I just go back, I'm just trying to like highlight on the requirements, like number 4, it's the required child abuse training. I do think that they've included that here, but that notion about the encouragement piece and just.
I totally
you
agree
know,
with you. I don't think.
But I agree with you, it's kind of all those vulnerable populations. But I just feel like it kind of goes back to kind of how, I mean, this came up in a couple of meetings ago, what do we do to track what encouraged means? And, you know, if it's not a requirement, are we tracking it that way anyway?
Right.
2915.5 already says after 2012, the coursework has to include instruction on assessment and reporting and treatment related to elder and dependent adult abuse and neglect. So I think
Which number, please?
2915.5 in section B.
What page?
77?
Yes.
Oh, so that's in our aging and long-term care.
It would be a part of our aging and long-term care
Okay.
section. So you're good to keep that one as children, focus solely on children, because the aging and long-term care requirement can be covered under 2915.5 and the corresponding regulation.
Thank you. So now back to our meeting booklet here. We've done child abuse assessment and training and intervention and reporting. Now we are ready for our aging and long-term care and assessment and reporting or whatever, right? I mean, let's give this the same title maybe as we give the child abuse one, if that's, if that's a piece of it. For us, for our own purposes, right?
But aging and long-term care seems like a broader topic to me.
It's definitely a broader topic.
So I don't think we can do the exact same
Right.
titling on it. Because
Well, then let's just have the long-term care just kind of. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, we did. I skipped over spousal abuse or partner abuse, and we need to go back to that, so. Okay, for spousal or partner abuse, everything's the same. Have we not done this one? Okay. Oh, yeah, because do we want to say what that would include? It doesn't say here what that would include in our current regs. It just says, in spousal or partner abuse, assessment, detection, and intervention strategies. That's what it says.
Wait, where is that?
On the top of page 5.
Okay.
Can you scroll back up to the title for a second?
Spousal or partner abuse.
Detection and intervention, okay. Because we don't actually have a reporting requirement for spousal abuse unless there's a Tarasoff situation.
We do not, yeah. Correct.
Whereas
So there is no
medical
reporting.
doctors do have a reporting duty for spousal abuse.
Good. So assessment, detection, and intervention is fine.
Wait. Say what you just said, Dr. Phillips. You don't have a what?
We don't have a reporting requirement. There are certain things we're mandated reporters for. We're mandated reporters for child abuse, elder and dependent adult abuse, and
Yes.
child abuse.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Do you want to make the child abuse and the spousal or partner abuse consistent with the assessment, detection, and intervention?
Yeah.
We put reporting in the child
And
abuse.
reporting in the child,
In the
because
child
that
one.
is appropriate, as you
Yeah.
were just saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so the thing is, do we want to detail any more about what this training should include, other than the broadness of assessment, detection, and intervention strategies related to?
And I think, yeah, I think that's probably,
And then 6 hours total, but did you still want the combined total of 2 hours?
Nope.
That doesn't
No.
apply anyways,
I don't understand why they.
because we're after 2004,
This
it was
was
already at
one
15.
that was mandated, and we were trying to get the least amount.
Oh, I see. Oh, it was 2 hours at first? And
Yeah,
then
now
flipped-
it's 15.
Flipped up to 15.
Yeah.
It's in the 29.
So it's 6 hours, period. Okay? All right, so we're fine, we don't have to include any more, so this is kind of our standard look. Okay? Aging in long-term care now, 1382.6. This we might want to say,
Assessment.
assessment, detection, intervention,
Intervention and
and reporting. Requirements.
And then I guess the question is, when I look back to 2915.5, page 77, then it's also kind of like, and as well as the elder and dependent adult abuse and neglect. Can we create another 13.8, 2.7 or whatever to separate that out if we feel like that doesn't make sense together? Although with the calculation of hours, that's included with those, so with the header,
Yeah, we'll change our header to,
what you just said,
Yeah.
plus the
Dependent adult.
elder and dependent adult abuse and neglect.
right, that's even better to say, rather than aging in long-term care. Now, this is aging,
And dependent adult.
it can be aging,
Long-term care and dependent adult?
I think the long-term care is, we don't even need that for,
It
but
depends on
it's
the
like,
person,
we
right?
want people to know about aging and the changes that take place as we age, and then the vulnerabilities about dependent adults
Right.
or elder adults, right?
Well, I think are we going to call it aging and vulnerabilities of dependent adults or aging and dependent adults?
I'm just talking now, I'm
Right,
not
right,
giving
right.
it a title. This is two separate things. One of them is the aging. We
I know.
want people to know the kinds of changes that take place as people age, different reactions to medication, cognitive changes, blah, 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 right? So in case they're working with that population. That's one piece, but like Ms. Jones was talking about, another piece now that is a required part of this is the vulnerabilities, and these aren't necessarily aging populations, but it could be dependent adults.
Could be a 19-year-old.
Exactly, it could be a dependent 19-year-old, but is a dependent adult and so more vulnerable, but it could be an older adult who is also more vulnerable just because of, we don't have the abilities that we do, when we're younger and stuff. So it's a two-part thing, right? That's what
Yeah, because
you're
at
highlighting.
beginning 2012, elder abuse and neglect were added. Elder and dependent adult.
Are added to this part.
Would it,
So I think this is, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, my recommendation is that you reflect the statute that this reg is implementing. And so would it be easier, just because of how many subjects you're dealing with, if you flipped it and said assessment, detection, intervention, and reporting, training requirements for aging, long-term care, and elder and dependent adult abuse, or abuse of elders and dependent adults?
Fine.
My concern is that if you start talking about the qualities, you're getting further away from what the statute says that you're implementing. So that's just a recommendation.
That sound okay to you?
Yes.
My suggestion was potentially calling it assessment, detection, intervention, and reporting training for aging and long-term care
Aging, long-term care and dependent adults.
and elder and dependent adults, and the abuse of elders and dependent adults. Does that make sense?
But you don't have to report aging. I mean, so it's never mind.
We have training related to, and that.
Y'all think of a
Okay,
title.
so
Still doesn't read right. does it?
Yeah. Maybe that's something that y'all can work on. I don't think we need to have in there long-term care, do we? Or do we, because that's part of the statute, or what?
you are implementing the statute that is requiring
Okay.
the training on aging and long-term care.
Okay, so what we want to do is just be able to add this other piece, which is the dependent adult
The elder
and elder
dependent abuse,
abuse
yeah.
part. How about aging and long-term care training, comma, dependent and elder adult abuse assessment, detection, and intervention, or something like that. Semicolon.
So the only question would be, not to be too ticky-tacky, does neglect need to be included in there, because that refers to the statute?
That's part of, well,
So I don't
sure,
know.
yeah,
I don't know.
let's put it, I mean.
But no,
it-
I like what you said, but that's the only thing that comes to
Yeah.
my mind is, are we missing neglect?
Yeah.
Should have, you know.
Abuse and neglect. It really gets to be an unwieldy title.
It does.
So I wonder if we,
It's in the statutory language, so I don't know if it's
That's crazy.
necessary. We can put it
A
in the
long-
description
long-ass title.
underneath and not have it be the title.
Yeah, actually, that might make more sense.
Yeah.
Aging, long-term care, and dependent adults, or training on aging, long-term care, and dependent adults.
Aging and long-term care training. That's our big title, and then we'll define.
Then we'll
what it is.
define what the
Yeah.
subjects are, which are all in the title right now,
Right.
except neglect.
Right.
So it'd be abuse and neglect of elder and dependent adults.
Mm-hmm. So that is just part of what this has to include. Okay?
The reason they lump those together is it's the same statute that gives you the requirement, and the reporting is exactly the same
Yeah.
for dependent adults and
Yeah,
elderly
Act
people.
29,
So we're going back to aging and
5A.
long-term care training.
Yep.
Yep. Sorry, Jason. Or Mr. Glass-Steagall, I should say.
See, Nicole's made us more formal because she always says Dr. Mr. and Ms.
She's
That's
taught me
Training was already
respect.
there.
That's good.
She's taught me
It's already there.
respect.
It's respectful. It's a board kind of thing. All right, so where are we here? We are starting this section that we renamed, and now we've kept it where it is. So we want to say our standard first paragraph,
Right.
our then 6 contact hours.
Mhm.
And then we want to say what will qualify for it. And then we want to say, do we want to say what it
What's the
includes?
subject matter?
Yeah, now
Yes.
we have to talk about what this includes, because,
Which I think we have on line 30 at the begin for the part that we had before. And I think it really is just adding the elder and dependent adult care, or adult abuse and
Right.
neglect.
so, shall include, I don't think we need to say, but not be limited to, the biological, social, and psychological aspects of aging, and the assessment, intervention, detection, assessment,
You don't want to say
intervention.
sociocultural, because that brings in the element of cultural diversity.
Okay.
So do we want to mirror the statute and add sociocultural?
Yeah,
And then under instruction on assessment and reporting, so you'd have detection, assessment, and reporting?
yeah.
Okay, and that would, we would mirror the statutory language with those two changes to add sociocultural and detection.
And then is there a way that we could just in the title add "and dependent adult" to the list?
Yeah.
In the title?
In the header?
Aging and long-term
Because right now it just
care.
says aging and long-term care, so it could
Well,
say,
does it aging dependent adults and long-term care training.
yes.
Yeah.
There you
That's
go.
good. Aging, dependent adult, and long-term care.
Yeah,
I mean, and dependent adult training.
yeah.
Because long-term care also can apply to the dependent adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're okay here. No more changes to this one. We've got our format down.
We're on a roll now.
We are on a roll.
Public comment?
Remember, the meeting is 2004.
Yeah. We have our standard paragraph now. Hold on, let's see. It's, we are done with this section, I think. Ready to move on to section 1386. Are there any other comments about these parts? Before we get going on this next one, this next section, can we take about a 5-minute break?
Yeah.
So we're going to head into.
5-minute, okay. Okay, we're coming back in session now. Continuing with pathways to licensure. And we are now on section 1386, even though it's not a yellow section. We'll start there and kind of go down. I'm wondering if there are any changes or things for 1386.
No, but I will say this refers back to the conversation earlier, so this is a little bit clearer about, the issue about the degrees.
It is clear the way it's written, although we don't have, we have to add school psychology to, let's see, in a department or school of psychology, take out educational psychology and just put in or education with the field of specialization in counseling, educational, or school psychology, right? Now, shall be accepted as an earned doctorate. But actually, it's not.
Just school of psychology.
No. It's a department or school of psychology or education. But we also we want to include this applied psychology,
Right,
not just a
that
degree in
piece.
psychology.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what I was saying.
correct. So we want, it's correct that they're earned in a department or school of psychology or in education, but if it's a doctorate in a school or department of psychology, it needs to be, what we want to say is applied, in one of these applied fields.
So should we just lift the language?
Yes,
from
lift the
other words?
language.
Consider-
Okay. We did it this morning when we were looking at,
2914, subdivision B1 and 3, I think. I think that's the one.
And we'll just do before X date this, after
yeah.
X date Y.
2930 of the Business and Professions Code.
Screen and let me know if you want the exact language of doctorate degree in psychology with a specialization or in education with a field of specialization language. Or do you mean in B? Sorry. Which language am I pulling, section B or section C?
They should both read the same.
We're amending that,
Right.
but the language is the same in both.
Right.
So
It's
the
in
math-
psychology with the field of specialization or in education with the essentially field of specialization. Okay? Okay, then I don't have any more changes until we get to the next page. And this is with the word registered psychologist, so we want to, yeah, flag that. Oh, I thought of something while I was doing it. Pre-licensed psychologist instead of registered psychologist. So it's pre-licensed. Anyway, something to
Yeah.
put down, put in the hopper. Y'all don't like that?
We'll have a naming contest.
Okay,
Sorry, I want to be supportive, but
you're not.
not doing it.
Well, let's just ask the stakeholders what they think.
Almost psychologist.
What'd you say?
An almost psychologist.
Almost, yeah, that's good. Maybe,
Did you just say almost?
maybe.
Junior psychologist.
Junior psychologist, yeah, they'd love.
Junior psychologist.
Yeah, they'd say assistant.
Can you take us to the
You might also just think about doing assistant, associate, and then licensed. Kind of like
take it to the
steps,
Yeah.
but yeah.
We can take it to the
Registered
stakeholders.
psychologist is really-
Oh, no, that's what I mean. So you'd have licensed psychologists, you'd have psychological associates, and psychological assistants.
But associates sound like they're hiring nurses.
Oh, and they're not, so,
We'll take it to the state.
okay.
We'll take it to the stakeholders.
I always thought they were slightly more qualified, but
Okay, supervision requirements.
my understanding.
I just have one thing here. Applied, this is in Part A, consulting psychology. We've got or experimental psychology, and experimental psychology would not be one of those degrees that lead to, it would not be a qualifying degree, so I think we ought to take that out. So it should read applied developmental psychology or consulting psychology, and then that's it. In which case, the primary supervisor may be unlicensed.
I'm sorry, where are you at?
This is under supervision requirements, page 8 here. It's 1A under supervision requirements.
In 1380.
1387C,
C1A.
C1A.
Take out, put or between applied developmental psychology and put or consulting psychology. Take out or experimental psychology.
You're going to have to say that one more time.
Make it work, experiments.
Correct.
And put something.
Or between developmental psychology and consulting psychology.
Yeah, or between applied developmental psychology and consulting psychology. Got it? Okay.
Does that read the way you were saying it then?
Sorry? Applied developmental psychology or consulting psychology, in which case, yeah.
Because you're striking the last one, so putting that one
Okay.
before.
Just making sure.
Okay, so that's all I have until we hit this darn highlighted section of how we're gonna really count these hours of supervised hours. This, the language still looks, okay.
We finally used the equation. It works.
All right.
I think it works.
Okay, so
I think it works.
can we read this and make sure it works?
Mhm.
So what we're saying, supervisors must supervise, of the total hours worked, the supervisor must supervise the trainee, must supervise the trainee, okay, for an additional 10% of that time. So this is over and above the number of hours that you want to count toward SPE, right? We're saying over and above those hours. Is that how you understand it?
That's how I'm reading it, yes.
Okay. So of the time spent in supervision, a minimum of 1 hour per week must be in direct individual supervisor with primary supervisor. The additional supervision can be provided by the primary delegator or co-supervisor. Time spent in supervision can be counted toward the trainee's SPE. So a maximum of 44 hours a week can be credited. For example, a trainee who works 40 hours a week must receive 4 additional hours of supervision. Okay, so in other words, if you're going to count 40 hours, then that would be 36 hours of work and 4
No,
hours.
that's if you're working 40 hours and providing services.
Right.
Then you receive an additional 10% or 4 hours, one of which must be direct individual supervision with primary, 3 additional hours with either the individual or group supervision with primary delegated or co-supervisors,
Right.
for a total of 44 hours
Of SPE.
SPE. So the core hours of providing psychological services is 40, and then you need 10% of that in supervision for additional 4 hours, so you can count 44 hours.
Okay, so the SPE is always over and above the number of hours of work a person is doing. So you can end up counting more than the number of hours you work. Okay.
Question.
Yeah, right.
So I think this is a bigger issue that I think we will need to hear from the stakeholders on this one, because when we heard from someone, there's a cap on the number of hours. Remember the person, I feel like it might have been from,
CDCR.
Yeah.
I want to say maybe someone talked about, was it Kaiser? Somebody was talking about kind of in their system, how they do it. So I think because I think that there was this whole conversation about, 4 hours from the 40 in total, right?
Right.
So it's 36
Some people,
plus
yeah.
4. So I think that, I think it would be interesting. I think it's clearer to me, perhaps, the language, and that's how I read it, or how I interpret it, is how you all said it was. I think, though, if this is confusing to people that hear it, we might need to revisit this, because I think it makes sense here, but I think the reality of folks out there, it seemed like it was different when we had that meeting almost a year ago.
Yeah, what they were saying was that they have a cap of 40, and that includes their supervision.
They're 4 hours of supervision.
All right, and some places, like CDRC was one of them, and I'm sorry she just left, but they said that I think it was them who said that they use the 40, they have people work a 40-hour week, and then they give them 4 additional hours. So it's being done both ways. It's been confusing to
Very.
folks. And some people, or some places don't, they require 40 hours of work, and they don't require more supervision on top of that. So,
And this would work in either situation. If they work 36 hours and receive 4
All of
hours
it
of
will
supervision,
count, yeah.
then they get 40 hours. Or if they work 40 hours and get 4 hours of supervision, they can count 44. So it really works in both cases.
The only thing comes to my mind though, Mr. Thomas, 'cause I feel like this, and maybe it was Dr. Phillips or Dr. Harlem at the time, was just saying that, the other thing in terms of the practice of hours per week that people would be working, it just seemed odd to be 44, like it should be capped at 40. And so I feel like I think that was kind of my recollection of like, wow, should it go beyond 40? Because the whole idea is 40 is a 40-hour work week, but whatever that means for people, 'cause I don't work a 40-hour work week. But the whole idea of what that looks like, and I feel like that was the conversation too at the time.
you're right.
And they could with the language. They wouldn't have to work 44 hours. If they wanted to work a total of 40, they would just do the 10% based on the 36 hours.
I think the conversation, though, Ms. Ork, and I agree with that, was, though, by putting it this way, what standard are we setting? If we're saying, like, basically, kind of the model would be 44 hours. And I think that was what the conversation, does that sound familiar to you guys?
I think it was just an example because there was a confusion about what the equation looked like. How do you determine the 10%? So we just put an example of how does 10% look if you were going to put it in an equation.
No, I know that, but we're saying here that there's a cap, though. We're telling people you can get a maximum of 44 hours per week.
Right.
And that's what the conversation, if I recall correctly, was like, is that, we want, policy-wise, do we want to set that as a standard, or is it 40 hours a week? That,
If you go in the other direction, though, your cap for them working then is then 36.
Right, well, 4 hours of supervision is working.
For
That's part of their
some,
job.
or for, because it sounds like for some of them, they're not counting the hours of supervision, that instance where you said they work 40 hours and then the supervision's on top of that they have to work those 40 hours, and that didn't seem to include the supervision.
Well, I think if the.
Am I not understanding your example
Most of the major
earlier?
institutions, I think, cap at 40.
Yeah.
In theory, anyway.
Right.
So if you work 36 hours, you'd really have to do 3.6 hours of
Right,
supervision, but you
right.
could do 4 hours if you wanted to,
Right.
and they'd all count toward licensure. I guess now we'd be counting a maximum of 44 hours.
We always have counted a maximum of
Have we?
44, but it's really been unclear.
That was, I can't remember when that was changed to 44, but it was changed quite some time ago to allow a maximum of 44. And that was based on if they provided psychological services for 40 hours per week and then received the additional 4 hours, they would want that supervision time to count as well. That was the thinking of the board when that policy was set.
As a practical matter, I think a lot of people were operating under the assumption that it was for every 9 hours work, there'd be an hour of supervision. But that's not what this formula is going to say.
That's right.
But I think in order to clarify the formula, it needs to say of the total hours worked other than supervision hours or except supervision hours, because they are work hours.
Right.
I mean, it's part of your workday.
It's part of your
It's not
workday,
like you
yeah.
go out for drinks and do supervision.
I mean, if you're working this is like, if you've got a job at a mental health center, say, and you're a psych assistant, you got a 40-hour-a-week job. All 40 of those hours aren't going to be in direct service. You're going to have administrative time, all this kind of stuff. I know what we say, about what counts and what doesn't count, and that might be more for a private practice model. But in reality, if people are working at an institution, they work 40 hours a week. Typically, if they're in a training position, I'd say that 40 hours includes the training they're getting. That's just part of their whole day. So in some ways, it's like labor laws versus Board of Psychology, what are we allowing and stuff like this. But I think I don't know, nobody's going to do 40 hours of direct service a week unless you're like really, I mean, nobody in supervision ever would do that.
Be virtually impossible.
It'd be virtually impossible. You're talking about 5 days a week, 8 hours a day with no breaks of, seeing people, doing assessments, stuff like that. No, that's not even counting anything that has to go with it besides a direct client contact.
Report writing.
Nobody's going to be doing that.
Any of that stuff.
So,
So that being said, then, is that really realistic then to even say 44 is the max then?
exactly.
And then I guess this is the question that we kind of were having back then was, basically, if that's been the max for a while, do a lot of people max out to 44 every week? And I think that became that conversation about kind of the policy being, what are we saying for folks in this situation? I think that was kind of the background, if I'm not mistaken.
When I think with the language as it's written now, you could work more than 44 hours a week. You could just only count 44 hours towards your supervised professional experience.
Right.
So do we want to cap the number of hours that they're able to count towards their supervised professional experience to 40? Or would it be more fair to leave the 44 in case, I think it was the Kaiser situation where she said that extra 44 hours is critical because they're doing direct patient care, and then the extra 4 hours is on supervision and going through the patient files and treatments.
I certainly don't think we want to lift the cap at 44. I think it'd be very hard for somebody to deliver effective services if they're doing more than 40 hours of face-to-face
No
and 4
joke.
hours of supervision. There's just be virtual impossibility if you're doing 40 face-to-face hours.
I totally don't think we want to add more
Yeah, okay.
hours. No, I'm not saying that at all.
No, I thought Ms. Sorek had suggested, do we want to cap at 44?
Yes.
We do cap.
Do we want it that high?
Do we want
That's another question.
44 to be able to count towards SPE, or are you saying that is not that's not a doable number of hours for them to be getting good supervised professional experience, so therefore it should be less? That was my question. Is 44 something you would like for them to be able to count toward SPE, or do you only want them to be able to count, because they may be working beyond that time, and I don't think we're dictating how many hours their employer can have them work. It's just how many can they count towards SPE.
And we do see a lot of people using the full 44 hours.
See, first, Mr. Glass-Steagall, say what you're going to say. And then.
I just wanted to point out one of the points Kaiser had made when they were here was that their employees don't always use the full 44, but they do like having the option when they do go on vacation, because there's a limited time for them to gain those hours. And if they go take a week vacation or something, it does limit their ability to gain licensure in a certain time period. So to have that extra 44 to use a couple weeks or a couple times was very helpful for them. So I think that was a huge part of their point, was please don't take those extra 4 away, because we use those when somebody wants to take a week off or a couple days off for vacation.
My thinking is kind of across the board. Here's where, again, I think we're running into, I don't want to take anything away from them. I do question if, how good how good is this supervision if you were actually doing direct service 40 hours a week. So, I mean, I think that's a larger question and a larger issue. And, most of many of the places where our people get, I'll say, their supervised experience, not in anything that's APA accredited, or because they'll put those, they have different kinds of requirements, and they do require adequate supervision. But for places where we are, or our trainees or psychology trainees or supervisees are basically staff members somewhere working for, you know, a county agency or a hospital system or something like that. They want to get every inch of whatever that they can out of the person. And so, I mean, we're at different purposes. For us, it's, as far as we're concerned, it's to get supervised while you're getting this practical experience, and the supervision is what we think is important here prior to licensure. For them, their purposes are they have a workforce. They want people to do work for them. So we're at cross purposes in terms of what we see as the important piece. So I don't want to punish anybody because they're in that setting. Anyway, I don't know what to do about it. I guess the organization will do what the organization does. And for people in a private practice setting, where I think tons of people are, I think this would be, as it reads now, I would really question it, but, you know, we got to make it consistent for everybody. So anyway, that's what I'm thinking. I don't know how clear it was.
Yeah, I don't think we want to create an incentive for employers to, at the risk of being a little incendiary, exploit people that are in this position. I think that's one of the sensitivities we need to keep in mind.
Right.
On the other hand, we do want to give people an opportunity to accrue their hours. They probably want to accrue them as quickly as they can because they've got student loans to pay.
That's right.
All that stuff. So it's a tough question.
It's a tough question, yeah. So anyway, we're talking 4 hours a week. That 4 hours a week is over and above the actual number of hours you're contracted to work, say, if you're in an organizational setting. But all of that will count to a maximum of 44 hours.
So let me say this, well, I just wanted to refresh my memory of that too. I feel like this is clearer language, so
Yeah.
Thank you, because I think that question about it before was unclear. So I would say let's keep it as is, but I would like to hear what people say about this issue.
I think it's a good
And I
idea.
will say, you know, to your point, Dr. Phillips, you know, just thinking if someone worked 52 weeks a year, right, that's 200 hours, right, 4 times that much. So I get what you're saying too about accruing it, but I definitely, when you said that before, or Dr. Harlem, whoever said it, it really struck with me to make sure that we were doing our best in the policy way to ensure that just that was taken care of or whatever. But I would love to hear, so if we could put that in the parking lot for the stakeholder.
Yeah, the number of
piece to
total
hear.
hours we're going to allow.
Right.
How
we want to.
And kind of what's the practice out in the world, you know, and, you know, kind of hearing from folks that would be a part of that. So I would say, let's keep it as is, because it's so much clearer.
It's
the
much
whole
clearer than it
other way.
was, yeah.
But
And what we could do is adding, in addition to this language, the same language that would cap it at 40, and just have both sections there for the stakeholders to kind of compare, and we can get comments, you know, specifically on which one they prefer.
Well, you might almost use a different or another example. I don't want to get laid down too much in examples, but
We want to, I think the distinction we're trying to make is should it be inclusive or over and above? Those are the two issues.
which obviously
And that's-
changes the choice of language.
Which changes, the language won't read the same, right?
Yeah.
But that's maybe that parking lot question we can put out there for folks. Here's our current language. Here's the issue around there that we want to make sure that we're
Addressing.
Yeah.
So what staff can do is we can provide those questions to the facilitators to make sure that we cover, should there be a cap? Should it be 44? And should it be inclusive or over and above? Does that cover?
Yes, and Ms. Sork, and I guess Ms. Marks too, because I think that once we have that answer, it seems to me, I just wonder, in terms of the way the regs are laid out here, that at some point would we strike, for example, language from them, but that would be then what we would use to educate folks. It just seems like a little different kind of a sentence structure than the typical regs, but I could be wrong. But I feel like at least we would then have some kind of pictorial, mathematical equation to show people, because I just feel like it was unclear before, but I don't.
I still think language could be tightened. I still think the language could be tightened up a little because it says of the total hours worked. Well, it's confusing because the total hours worked, in theory, really includes your supervision hours also. So I think it needs to be clarified that it's the total hours worked with the exception of the supervision hours. But we can do that tweaking later.
So just to your thing, I don't think there's a question that we would cap it if these are over and above the work hours. That's not a question or an issue. It can't be. We would say it couldn't be any higher than 44 hours. And still people might be taking advantage of with that. So that's not really the question. Do we want to cap it? It
Okay.
needs to be capped, I think. But the question is, should the hours be inclusive or,
Over and above.
yeah, or over and above? Still no more than.
Yeah, but that was kind of my question though, too.
Yeah. But that's what we want to put out.
But my question was, should it be capped at 40? Excuse me.
At
So,
40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Where it should be capped
Yes.
is a different question than should it be capped.
As in, there needs to be a cap,
But
but
there
it
has
would
to be a
depend
cap.
on
There has to be some kind of cap.
Right. We have to have a cap, so, okay.
cross it
Okay, exactly.
I do want to compliment staff on coming up with language that
Actually.
we really could understand, so that's good.
It's really, you gave us something specific to react to.
Very different than before.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Need a whole meeting just on
Much better, yeah. Well, y'all did do a good job, and thanks for saying that, Dr. Phillips. It gives us something clearer now, I think, to react to, so that's good. Okay, so are there any public comment on this piece? All right, so let's just kind of keep going. Anything else as part of supervision requirements? As we move on. Keeping going. We did. Where do I have my next thing? Oh, yeah. Page 21 of 32. That's where the next yellow thing is. I think the other stuff, most of this, prior to this, is scratched out stuff. But here, this is SPE accrued outside of California. And our question at the time was, what is in substantial compliance? And that's still our question, I think. How would that be determined?
I mean, what comes to mind to me, I felt like it would be a high threshold to ensure that of compliance, but I kind of feel like substantial would need to be defined perhaps. And that I feel like in using substantial, it puts emphasis on the need to comply, but in all honesty, maybe it's just striking through and just saying in compliance with all of the requirements in section 1387.
But I don't think we can say in compliance with the requirements because, I mean, for example, if we're talking about somebody who's in a formal internship or postdoc, easily they're going to be in compliance. We're really talking about people who may not be in a formal internship or a formal postdoc. And then what do we determine is substantial compliance? Because we can't require, do we want it to be in compliance, period? So for every hour of supervision, or for, whatever we just decided about. How many hours they have to have with their individual supervisor. I mean, I think clearly that's going to happen in an accredited internship or postdoc, but is it going to happen?
And I mean, the regulations vary from state to state, so they may be completely in compliance with their regulations.
Right.
And yet, they're not hitting all the marks that we expect them to hit.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
And I think if it's something material, obviously we should be concerned about it. If it's not a substantial or material fact, I don't think we should be all that. I mean, I don't think our purpose is just to prevent everybody from getting licensed that does their experience somewhere else.
Not at all.
Yeah, so substantial compliance is one of those legal phrases that is subject to a lot of different interpretations.
Right. So what do we mean? Or do we even need it in there? If they're in compliance with all the laws and regulations, if it is a psychologist who's licensed at the doctoral level, they're in compliance with all the regulations of where they are functioning. If it's a formal postdoc or internship, we're fine. There may be the occasional person that is getting this experience in something non-formal, like a private practice would be the.
Or they could be working for, depending on what the regulations look like, they could be working, I'm going to give an example, a county department of mental health.
That's right.
Where the regulations allow all the supervision to be given by any licensed professional.
True.
So they may not be getting supervision by a psychologist.
Right.
And that would give me pause.
That would give me pause too.
But that may be completely in compliance with the regulations of the other
Right.
states. So.
So what do we want to say here? We've said here supervised by a primary supervisor who's a psychologist licensed at the doctoral level. So we're saying all out of state SPE has to have that. So even if they are in compliance with the laws and regs of their jurisdiction, we're saying even if you allow all these master's level or non-psychologists, doctoral psychologists to do it, we don't allow that, and we're putting this is number one, we don't allow it. Number two, in compliance with the laws and regulations. So then where is substantial compliance? What do we mean by that? I don't want the staff to have to figure that out. Is this substantial compliance or not? I mean, I think we need to know what we're talking about. If there are things that we want to say are required, let's put them down here. It has to be doctoral level supervisor. At least one, your primary supervisor has to be doctoral level. Psychologist, that person has to be in compliance. Anything else that we would want to say other than insubstantial?
I mean, but then if we turn back a couple of the pages, I mean, giving your example, even if it's not in their jurisdiction, if you look at these requirements, would it be too much to say in compliance with these requirements?
Well, what are our requirements? Let's see.
So that would start with C, right?
Which page are we looking at?
So I guess we would start on page 6, right?
Starts on page 6.
I'm sorry?
Page 6.
Starts on page 6.
Okay.
Because you're saying all of the requirements of 1387.
Okay, so we're talking about,
It's everything, including the supervision plan and agreement, right? And
Yeah, that doesn't seem realistic. I don't know that every state
that, I think that's why there's the,
So maybe we should just go through and say which ones we think they need to comply with.
And don't say substantial, just
Yeah.
say.
Well, it's much
these
more
things.
specific, I would think, although this obviously got by OAL at some point, I would imagine that the Office of Administrative Law wouldn't be thrilled with such a vague term. So perhaps if we were just to lay out which marks they have to hit, it would make it a lot easier for staff, I think.
Ms. Marks, would that be a problem?
So supervision requirements. Primary supervisor, we have that.
All right.
And that, any place would have that.
Yes.
Page 8. All primary supervisors must be licensed psychologists, we're saying that. We are,
Proprietary interest.
shall have no proprietary interest, right? But we've said that. So this is accrued outside of California.
So
No
they may be
proprietary-
able to
And they
have-
do, you can in other states, you can.
So I don't think we should hold that against them if they're doing what they're supposed to do.
I don't either, if they're in compliance, so we won't add that.
You should still have a cap, I think.
I think there should still be the 10% calculation.
Yeah.
At least that's the number of hours we're going to count.
Yeah, so, yeah, let's put something in there that that it, 10% of the time worked, and we'll figure out whatever we decide at the stakeholders
We can
meeting.
stick it
we'll
back
put
in there.
Stick it in there.
We do want some kind of cap, don't we? Or I guess that would be part of.
It'll be part of whatever
that'd be
we
part of
decide.
3
Yeah,
or
that's
4.
right. Okay, the agreement, I don't think we ought to, that's not a requirement we'll have.
But, let me ask this question, but the items that are listed there, we would want that, would we not?
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think we can require this. Because,
Well, I'm sorry, number 7 though, where it talks about the total numbers of hours and all that stuff, and how they were verified. You want that?
well, that's part of what we end up requiring, so if they're sending this in to us,
No, I got you, I'm saying, this is what
Those
we
will
want
be
to
the
require.
questions,
We'd want to have
yeah.
that in there, right?
yeah, but I think, this is talking about how this is submitted to the supervisee and stuff like that. If somebody's coming from another state and got their supervision, or somewhere else and got their supervision outside, then that's part of what we're gonna end up requiring. Who was who's the person, how many hours did they do, what.
What was the proportion of supervision?
Exactly. That's something on our forms.
Yeah, I don't think we can do the agreement.
I don't either, yeah.
I wasn't saying an agreement, I was talking about the information, so that's what I was trying
Oh,
to figure
okay.
out.
Yeah.
You mean number 7?
So maybe it isn't exactly that language, but we want to get that information, is what I was saying.
We are, but I think we get it on the stuff we get from other folks. This is talking about not only what the information is,
I guess the
but
question
how
is, do we get it? I'm going through it and
Yeah.
saying, I think these are the things we would need. So if we don't get on the form, I mean, going back to what we want to put in there, we would say we would want to get the name and contact number of the trainee, of the supervisor, we want the start and the end date, we want the total hours. That's what I was just saying.
Right.
So it would not be this exact same language, but I'm just trying to figure out how we could formulate what we would need
Well,
on that end.
the verification that they get of their hours,
Yeah.
we need to include this information.
they have to include a verification.
Yeah, that's what I'm
That
saying.
includes.
But that's what I was saying.
Question
Yeah, that makes
for
sense.
the committee. I'm wondering if picking and choosing what different qualifications would be for in-state versus out-of-state folks for us to consider for licensure. It may be cleaner for the committee to consider if we just require compliance with this section, because if we get into a picking and choosing, there may be a fairness issue for out-of-state folks versus in-state folks.
Okay, but you're in a state where you can have a proprietary interest in the practice. Are we going to penalize them for doing what was legal in that jurisdiction?
That's right.
They're in a jurisdiction where they don't do a supervision agreement or a supervision plan. Are
Right.
we going to penalize them for not doing a supervision agreement plan when it wasn't required of them to accrue the hours? So I think we do have to cherry pick,
I think
actually.
so too.
Or Or could we not say that and then say, at the review of the board? I mean, we've used this in other language, you know, in terms of people's compliance with pre-licensure agreement. I forget where, we just looked at it a little earlier. We had the language that said, upon review of the board. Because I
think we ought to put that in as the last thing, but it's always the last thing, or upon review, because what we want to do is allow staff to look at these, and we don't want a bunch coming back to the board. And so
I guess I was going with what Ms. Sorek was saying, in compliance with the requirements of Section 387.
I think we'll, go ahead.
I feel like at some point, as a state board, we have set standards where we say that people that are licensed are going to meet certain things. And so I get it, if you're in a different jurisdiction and you come, there is a requirement that we have to, just like we review, exceptions to be made for continuing education or longer periods. There will be some staff review of that might come back or should come back to the licensing committee. But I do think that the issue of fairness and the issue of kind of, fidelity to the process, I would say we don't want to, I don't know, if we can know what every jurisdiction does, to say, that we can only pick certain things. I don't know. I know I don't have a good sense about all of their requirements, so that's all I was saying about that.
Well, I don't think we need to know what all their requirements are. I think what we need to know is if you're coming from somewhere else and you didn't come from a formal training, like formal internship or formal postdoc, then how do we know that your supervision was adequate?
And who supervised you?
Yeah, so part of it is that person who supervised you had a doctorate, you had a certain amount of supervision for all the time you worked. This person is going to send in verification of your, how many hours you worked and whether or not you're ready to, you passed at that level, and can, whether it was adequate. And, I think we want to look at the larger things.
Let me ask you, based upon that example, for instance, so if we did get that kind of a verification form, would staff then also review to see if the licensed supervisor had disciplinary issues against it? At some point, what would be our way to verify that that's all been done? Do we, you know what I mean? So I do.
Well, don't they do it now? What do they do right now if it's a licensed psychologist in the other state?
I don't know, so I'm asking the question. Because I feel like that, based upon your example, it's a good one, and I get what you're saying. But I do think that there has to be some rubric to begin to look at. Because I do think that just because you've got the form, which is what I was saying about kind of the log format, which may not be the log that they use, there's something that then we would then review it though, right? And we would kind of use some kind of, not discretion is the wrong term, I'm not using it because I think that means there's some kind of formula way of approaching it, So anyway, I don't know how that's done. Maybe staff can tell us when we have someone
What do y'all do now?
out of state that comes and applies.
When somebody comes, yeah.
So when we have out-of-state applicants, so we will verify that they meet 1387. So like, for example, we will verify that the person is supervised by a licensed psychologist in the state where they are accruing hours. And then we will verify that they have the school qualification. And then just like, it's like a very similar questionnaire that we ask them for the in-state applicants. So for example, that you don't have interest in the business of your supervisor, is not paid supervision, and then you didn't lease or rent a space, like those criteria that's very similar to existing applicants.
Do you find there's a problem with that in terms of many people not meeting them? And then what's the state? So if they didn't do it because their jurisdiction did not require that, what's the next step there? Do we go a different level of questioning or something?
For example, like that the supervisor doesn't meet the qualification, just clarification.
Well, we just said about the business interest, and we were just informed that not every jurisdiction follows that kind of rule. What would happen if we had that kind of an applicant?
Thank you. That came in, what would we do after you did the initial questionnaire check off?
Right, so we will follow what existing our board has been doing. Like if that's something not allowed, like that, the paid supervision, then we'll just say, sorry, we cannot accept this SPE because it was a paid supervision or because you ran a space from your supervisors is not allowed. So we'll advise them these hours cannot be accepted due to those reasons.
Wow, we're tough.
That's very tough, because there are a lot of states where they say they wouldn't have supervisors if they couldn't be paid. And I know this happens, so I'm, that I think is, wow. I don't know what to say to that.
Is there, Ms. Orick or Stephanie, I can't remember your last name right now, sorry. John, sorry. Long day. So is there a situation where they can appeal that kind of a decision, and what happens next in that case? Or Mr. Thomas?
Well, we're denying hours based upon Section 1387, so there's really no appeal process because that is what the requirements are, how the requirements are set forth.
So what about this requirement that supervisors take a 6-hour course and of course, they're not they wouldn't have that in supervision. So what do we do about those folks?
I think we have allowed that to be okay, like when the supervisor doesn't necessarily has the 6 hours supervision course, because that's our
So we allow
requirement.
that, but we don't allow.
And that's why we're asking for
Yeah.
what is substantial, what should we, because it's, if it's required, listed as a minimum requirement for licensure here, where's the line drawn?
Exactly.
And if by allowing somebody from out of state to meet different standards, are we setting our residents of California to a different standard? And so that's where the kind of problem has stemmed from. It's like what does need to be required.
Exactly. So that's why I think we were, at least to my mind, I think that's why we were going down and trying to figure that out, because I don't know why we wouldn't think, I don't think we can require it, and I don't think we should, but I don't think why we would think that, we won't let somebody pay somebody for supervision. Maybe in that state it's the only way they can get it, or that they would get enough supervisors, but we're not saying the supervisor has to be trained. So one we're not allowing and one we are allowing, and to me, they're both maybe important pieces, or we got to see if we got folks coming from somewhere else. Is there any way for us to accept it? If we don't, we can't require that their supervisors have training in supervision. It's a good thing to have training in supervision. We want our people, but if they don't have it and we're allowing that, then why aren't we allowing supervisors to get paid for supervising people? I get the dual role stuff, but
On the flip side, though, if we're saying this is important for our licensees, people that are trained in the state, to hit all these marks, something feels off about not asking other people to hit the marks.
well, I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. But if we have insubstantial compliance, then why did you decide that a course in supervision wasn't important, and you'd let somebody go through in that? I mean, I'm just using this as an example. I understand the different considerations here and multiple relationships, etc.
So I have a question. I have a question.
That's the problem with the vague.
Thank you so much, because that's helped me to explain that process. Thank you, guys. And then I also, I mean, I guess going back to the beginning question that was raised about this, Ms. Marks, I mean, what does the definition of insubstantial compliance even mean?
I'm not sure I've actually seen a definition of it. I think the way I understand that the board staff has been applying it is that you're looking at the, for lack of a better word, the substantive requirements versus the procedural requirements. What might be more that goes to the heart of the supervision versus something that might be considered more of a procedural issue. That's how I understand that they've been looking at it.
So can I ask another question as a follow-up? Thank you. So if there was, because again, the way I was in my layman's kind of way, I was thinking like it's just a weighted kind of a compliance, like it'd be a stronger weight. If there was language that was added on, which we used earlier that I can't really exactly say it, like, but as, evaluated or whatever by the board.
As determined by the board.
As determined, thank you, Dr. Horn. As determined by the board. I hear Mr. Thomas and Ms. Chung saying, and Ms. Sorg saying, that direction would help staff to be able to do it a little bit more clearly. But if that was added, would that be too wiggly? But would it be an opportunity to get to the spirit of what 1387 is? However, I don't know how else to say it, but like to consider the factors of a different jurisdiction, and what would be a helpful way to kind of think about that.
Are you talking about when you say as determined by the board, meaning that it actually comes before the body of the board?
Well, licensing committee first, probably, and then.
I guess what I'm actually thinking is it's like almost kind of, yes, probably, but also a process that would allow for, appeals is not the right word, but a way to provide more review and explanation. And for those types of factors to be taken into consideration if it's a different jurisdiction and how could it be weighted, or, I feel like, and I could be making this up, and there's been times where maybe a percentage of stuff could count or something, when people have had extraordinary circumstances, and for extra time to complete the accrual of their SP. But I'm just curious, what would be a helpful way, thinking about it legally?
How about this? Back to what you said earlier, just using your, as looked over by the board. If we said in compliance with all of the supervision requirements, then anybody who has anything that's not in compliance with insubstantial requirement compliance, but this requirement isn't. I don't think that's what we can be necessarily doing. So I'm wondering, I know we're doing it, but I'm not sure what our criteria are. That's partly what I'm saying. So if we said in compliance with the supervision requirements, then anybody who comes from an out of state and they're not in compliance, we could take a look at. You could let us know where they're not in compliance. We could take a look at I don't know how many people this would be, but it might be an overwhelming number. I don't know. But short of that, I don't see any way. I'm not comfortable with saying, because how y'all do it right now, say, may not be how the next group does it. I mean, I think that's, if staff is going to be reviewing this, and I think that's totally fine, and you should, I want to give as much guidance and direction as possible, and not say, that you would determine, because what you determine substantial compliance may be different after you leave and somebody else comes. And that leaves our potential licensees up for what is in compliance? So I'm just wondering if we can do a little pilot look right now and just kind of say, bring back anybody who is not in compliance and to the licensing committee and tell us why they're not in compliance, and let's take a look. Maybe what we'll find is that they fall in a consistent, sort of like we did when we looked at the 30-month extensions. We actually found out, and we gave y'all okay, you can go ahead, and then if it's anything beyond this, bring it back to the licensing committee. That would be a good way to do it.
Dr. Horn, I think it's, I'm sorry, Ms. Ork, you were going to say something when I finished, I thought.
I was just nodding my head.
So, I've looked at papers for a long time a day. So, I know this, but I'm going to say it out loud to make sure I am right on target. So again, we're talking about folks that would be coming from out of state that would be seeking licensure for the first time. These aren't folks that have already been licensed in another jurisdiction and they've come here, right?
Right.
Could be.
Could be.
Because
Okay.
But then we have different.
the other option for them is they have to be licensed for 5 years and meet the CPQ.
Okay. So that was my question, because I think that would be an interesting way to look at the data. Are these newly licensed folks, or are they folks that have been practicing for a number of years in another jurisdiction and have come? And again, I don't have an opinion necessarily to say how things would then get rated or not, but it just seems like that would be an interesting piece of data to see, because I don't know, just because I feel like it would be different.
And some of the people may not even be licensed elsewhere. They might have gained part of their hours out of state and moved to California before becoming licensed, so they may not even have any licensure at all.
And I feel like that case, I feel like I've seen at some point come before the licensing committee.
Oh, we see that.
And so, again, that's where that piece about whatever the best language is, Ms. Marks, about, upon review of the board, which I don't know the best way to language it to say, for staff or to the licensing committee, but I feel like we have reviewed something like that before. So there's been an opportunity to take it into consideration, different factors.
I think this is actually mostly what we do, because we have rules for people who have been licensed in another state for 5 years, blah, 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 blah. Then they get licensed here if they just take all those pre-licensure courses, blah, blah, blah. They haven't had any discipline. So we have those rules. We're not really looking at their supervision at that point in time. So this is going to more be people who move here prior to licensure that we're talking about here. So this, I would like to make this request that we ask staff to go take a look at anybody who is not in compliance, but in what you've maybe insubstantial. Take a look at that and see where you draw the line. Here's where they weren't in compliance, and this is what we did. This many cases we said this, just like you did for the reasons for extending time to get supervised. Could y'all bring that back to us?
Sure. And then I think in the meantime, I think that kind of placeholder language for now would be important.
Right.
I think for me at least, to be able to have an additional review, and again, however that language should be written, and Ms. Marks would know better than me for sure. But I feel like to be able to just have that as a placeholder piece, and then we can see what universe we're really looking at anyway.
Right.
After the review.
So do we want to have here, we don't want to put in do we want to change that and say in compliance? Or do we want to say in substantial compliance
I think we want to say in compliance.
In compliance.
Based on this
Okay.
discussion, I would say
Based- okay.
compliance. I would like to ask Ms. Chung, is it, what kind of volume are we talking about? Do you have a sense of that?
For out-of-state applicants who doesn't meet the 1387, or all out-of-staters?
Out of state?
All of them?
That don't,
That don't meet.
that aren't in compliance, yes.
I need to get back to you on that because it comes in sporadically sometimes, and then sometimes they're good when reviewed. So when it comes across my desk, usually they have some problems, like aren't in compliance. And I want to say it's not too many, like be positive about that, yeah, optimistic about that number. So I don't think it's a lot.
If it's, if it's not, then it gives us the ability to say in compliance, and then we'll review, the board can review any that are, that are not. So that's what we want to know. We want to get some number in.
Sounds good.
Okay, great.
Just to throw this out there, on the registration limitation of registration period, section 1391.1, the last line of that.
Ms. Rourke, 1391.1.
1391.1, and it's the last sentence, says, upon showing of good cause, as determined by the board, these specified time limitations may be reasonably modified. I don't know if the committee wants to consider crafting similar language.
Upon showing of good cause, I would, I think.
For this section, upon showing of good cause as determined by the board, these specified compliance requirements
These specified requirements.
may be reasonably modified.
I like that too. Not compliance requirements, just say these specified requirements may be reasonably modified. And that would be as determined by the board, yeah. Okay, great. Excellent conversation. Any public comment here about this piece? So we are continuing to move on. What time is it here? Okay. All right. Let's just keep going.
Dr. Vaughn?
Yes.
I just have one clarification. I was trying very hard to follow that. But the only thing I would say is that a consideration would be to just be careful that we're not setting up a requirement for someone that they can't possibly meet. So as long as there's a chance for the board to review or something like that, which I think is what you're getting at, because sometimes people are in another state and they do everything they're supposed to do. They don't know they're going to move to California.
Right.
And if, as you said, if the regulations are not the same, then they may be caught in one of those strange situations where they've done everything according to what they're supposed to do. Then they get to California, and there's no possible way that they could have possibly met the requirements to be licensed, their supervision requirements. So that's the caveat. I think you're getting at that, but I'm just thinking.
That's exactly,
Okay, thank you.
what we're talking about. We don't want to punish people who've
Right.
done what they're supposed to
Right.
do, what they can do, and all like that. And so that's what we want to check it out.
I think in a countervailing way, I don't think we want to send the message to licensees that things we're telling them are material to becoming licensed are not important when it's somebody coming from out of
Right,
state.
right, absolutely. So in compliance, and then we'll take a look. Okay, are we moving on? Thanks, Dr. Linda Craig. continuing to go. So the next thing that's highlighted is 1390.3 Statement of Purpose.
And I think in this section, it was just a matter of should this title be changed, because it doesn't really describe the section.
Okay. And we want to put registered psychologist, just kind of take a look at that again. Just make sure we don't miss it anywhere it's listed. All right, so what is this section about? To be determined title, unknown.
I kind of feel,
Psychologist type or wannabe psychologist?
I would say, I would think maybe we'll want to put registered psychologist as the placeholder for right now.
Yeah.
And know that that's, you can keep it highlighted, because we
Yeah,
don't know the
keep it
title,
highlighted.
but I think that's where we would want to.
Yeah.
And I think we also wanted to consider what the title of this, the header for this section should be, because it's currently statement of purpose.
Right, that's what we're saying.
And-
That's what
oh,
we're
I'm
talking
sorry.
about, yeah.
Sorry.
It's been a long.
It has. Sorry.
It's a placeholder header.
I'm like on a 15-second delay or something.
Okay, we changed that to 90 days. So we are continuing through. I think we're okay for me.
Dr. Horn, shall I make a motion?
I think so. Woo-hoo.
So I'd like to move that we accept all the work that we have done this afternoon related to the Pathways to Licensure regulations. And that would be item number 5B, with all of the additions, corrections, reformatting, as well as some of the data collection to be provided to the board.
I will second that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that we accept all the work we've done on agenda item 5B, the regulations for the Pathways to Licensure, regulations review for the Pathways to Licensure, with all the changes, questions, issues, formatting that we've done. So, is there any more conversation or discussion about this? Okay, Mr. Glass-Steagall.
Horn?
Aye.
Jones?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Pass.
Okay, that has passed. Yay! All right, so let me just take a look at the time because we need about 45 minutes. It's roughly 3:30. It's a little before 3:30. I'm wondering what we want to do right now. Do we want to? Yeah, good idea. So now let's skip to agenda item number 7. Oh, we're taking a 5-minute break and then we'll be back. And move to agenda item number 7, which is the licensing report. What is this called? Is it the licensing report?
Actually, just a recap or update from last time on the processing time frame. Yeah.
Application processing timeframes
Yes.
report, update.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Of course, no problem. Thank you, Dr. Horn. So this is just an update from the board meeting because we mentioned that we're going to update how we calculate the processing timeframes because previously we have used the oldest date on the application that received, and then we just calculate and count the number of days to the day that we capture the statistic. But to be more accurately reflect the processing time, so we're just going to take the oldest date, amount all the analysts, and then take an average out of that. So this is in the chart. So this is our newest application processing time frames as of February 28th. So for psychologists, even though the oldest dates that we received is on February 6th, it actually takes us an average of 10 business days to process the application. And then at that time, all the psych assistant and registered psychologist application has been already in process, so it's 1 business day for those. And that's it.
This is great. Yes,
Yay. All right.
It's fabulous, and even 10 days. So, just so I can understand, when we say the oldest date pending initial application review.
Because what that means is when the application get assigned to the analyst, so it will go into a queue. So it will be, for example, February 6th, so it will be the oldest date that the new apps that they received for each analyst. So it could be starting from February 6th and then February 10th, and then they get a new app. So it's the oldest date in the queue that they're going to process. That's why it's pending.
But the average time is
About
takes
10
days.
Yes, at
So
that time.
some of these, like this February 6th one, obviously it's been more than 10 days. So that may mean something is going on with that one that's taking a little bit longer or something like that. But still, our average is, I mean, even that's a month, it's 30 days basically at the. But average is 10, right? Is
Yes.
that kind of?
Yes, it's kind of like that,
Okay.
yes.
Great.
Thanks.
Great.
Really quick, I just wanted to introduce and welcome, I know it's the middle of the day, but Natasha Lim, who is our new Breeze and licensing coordinator in the licensing unit, and we now have no vacancies in the licensing unit, so yay to that.
Welcome. So how are you liking it so far?
Oh, I love it.
Best place ever.
Best place ever.
I came from EDD, so it's a completely different industry. And so prior to that, I was public health, and then prior to that, it was healthcare services. So
Great.
I'm connected to the health sector of government, which is what I like. So it's a good thing.
Fabulous. That's wonderful. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so what time is it here? So do you want to just, let's end today. We'll go into closed session. We have some closed session business. We'll take up tomorrow with agenda item number 4, the continuing professional development stuff. And we'll close now. After we've gone in closed session, we will come back just to adjourn for the day, but I don't think there's going to be any more business. If anything came up today before we say that you'd like to put on another agenda for a future meeting, let me offer that opportunity right now to the public.
Thank you very much, but no.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we are going to go into closed session right now and got some